This is Creating K-Pop / Making K-Pop, presented by In My Fields on the Himalaya app. I am JRE.
And I'm Emily.
And we have some special guests.
Along with the YouTubers roundtable that we had the past couple of episodes, we have a journalists roundtable, and we have some very special, very critically acclaimed, and very notarized journalists out here. I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves. Sara Layne, aka Sara Ajuma, or Young Ajuma. We have Lai Frances, Tamar Herman, and Crystal Bell.
Hello, what's up, everybody? It's your favorite Ajuma, Young Ajuma. I also go by Sara Layne when I'm writing, and I'm not sure how I got here, but I do write for an online publication called A1 Radio, as well as some other publications that are no longer in existence. So thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you for coming.
Hey.
Hello, I am a writer, producer, editor of all things pop culture and fandom, which includes K-pop, and you can find my work at MTV News, also Teen Vogue, also on YouTube. If it's a fun video that you've watched, I might have produced it. So.
Oh, snap.
Yes. Stray Kids, GOT7, MTV stuff. Is that? Yes, nice.
Oh.
Nice. All right.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lai Frances. I am a multimedia journalist and producer. The majority of my publications that I write for are for Tomorrow Magazine and Pop Crush. Every now and then you'll see me on Build Series hosting. And yeah, self-proclaimed girl group enthusiast, and that's all.
Okay.
Most of all at once. Okay. And lastly,
Hi, I'm Tamar Herman. I write for a bunch of outlets like Billboard and Forbes. I've written with Crystal at MTV. I've worked with Lai. Hi guys. Hi everybody. I miss everybody. It's so weird not having KCON this year.
right.
True.
It's weird. It's weird.
Also, shout out, you're having a book coming out very soon?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
I have a book about BTS called BTS Blood, Sweat, and Tears. It's out on August 11th. You can buy it anywhere. Support your local indie bookstore. I have a whole list I'm happy to hand out if anybody wants.
Prepared.
Yeah, it's good. You should check it out.
Yeah.
All right, so Lai, Tamar, Sara, Crystal. We all start out somewhere, right? All of us, whatever you are. How did you start out with your own blog, podcast, etc.? How did you start out? Just for everybody to know. Who should go first? Let's see. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Lai.
All right. Where did I start? Well, obviously before becoming a professional. You are a fan of something, right? So, I guess it came from my discovery on YouTube of Girls' Generation, and then just starting from there, I turned my Tumblr into a girl group appreciation Tumblr page of anything that had to deal with Girls' Generation and Wonder Girls and Miss A and Brown Eyed Girls, and the list goes on, right? And then eventually I started going to concerts, and from concerts I just grew the balls to network my way through to see like different people in the industry, and eventually one thing led to another, and it made me I finally made the decision in college that I wanted to pursue journalism or something in the multimedia field where I get to tell the stories of people who I can identify with in the media in terms of Asians, because in Western media we don't see that much representation. True. Right? So I kind of wanted to be that person to tell these stories through music and pop culture, because these are things that I love. Yeah, that's how I started. I started off as an intern for a publication that's not as great as it used to be. And then it led to CBS Radio, where I dabbled a little bit on promoting some K-pop in there as an intern, and then eventually Pop Crush, Tomorrow, Allure, all these contributions as a freelancer. And then KCON happened, and that actually led me to Build Series. So
Love seeing the trajectory to Build Series. That was really cool. Sara?
Okay, well, like Lai said, I also started as a fan, and I began writing for Drama Fever. which I'm sure if
Remember
you
that
ever
one.
watched a K-drama in the early, like, 2010s, then you would have been on Drama Fever. And from there, it just kind of went on. I found A1 Radio, which was just starting out at the time. And one day they were like, we need somebody to talk to some people. And I was like, well, I like talking to people. Who are we
That's how it
doing?
starts.
And yeah, that's pretty much how it started. And that's it. I did not go to school for journalism or anything. I'm actually a teacher. So everything that I
Mm.
do is freelance. But it's been a wild, crazy, fun ride. And I really would not change this for anything.
All right, bet. Nice. All right.
Crystal.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I have a pretty boring path to journalism because I took what is now probably the abnormal path, which is going to journalism school, which again, I don't think to be a journalist, you have to go to journalism school. And I think we're seeing that a lot, especially right now. A lot of young, exciting writers never went to journalism school. But I did. So I went to NYU. I studied journalism and sociology. Because very smartly they make you double major because they realize that statistically you gotta have a backup plan. So I did the very typical thing of I went to journalism school. I did internships. I interned for Billboard for a year. I did a semester in New York, a semester in London, and I just really loved music. I really loved pop culture, and it was at that Billboard internship that I wrote kind of my first K-pop article. And one of their first K-pop articles, which is pretty cool, that was in like 2009. It was about Wonder Girls, so that was fun. Yeah, I mean the OGs. So yeah, I kind of just fell into love and writing about pop culture because I loved it. So, you know, every journalist is kind of like, I have this vivid memory of being in my first day of this class at J school, and everyone's going around and being like, okay, what do you read every day? And it was like all of these like white men who are like, I read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the, you know, very typical. And then they get to me and I'm like, I read Teen Vogue, I read 17 magazine, I read, you know, it was just like pop culture, and it was things that celebrated young women. So looking back, I'm not surprised that I'm doing what I'm doing because I've always really loved the stories of young women and really vibed with and championed their stories. So yeah, from J school, I graduated, got a job at HuffPost, had a lot of jobs in between, ended up at MTV News for 5.5 years, and now I'm kind of navigating the freelance life. So yeah, it's always an interesting ride with journalism, but I think my approach was pretty boring in comparison because it was so predictable.
All right, bet.
Lastly, Tamar.
I also kind of just fell into it. I started blogging about K-pop when I was studying abroad in Korea. I was already, a K-pop fan, and
Nice.
I kind of assumed there was no future in journalism because that's what everyone in New York media tells every young person. Don't do it. It's a bad idea. But I always liked writing, and I actually found out about K-pop through like some writing forums I was involved in when I was a teen. And then when I was in college, after I was already blogging and writing, I don't remember if I was writing already for like a rinky-dinky K-pop site that paid $5 an article, which I met Lai and a lot of other really great people there. And at the same time, I happened to get an internship I went to Queens College, and oddly enough, through like my business minor, I got an internship at NBC New York. So I ended up like in a newsroom there while I was ready. Like I considered this like, yeah, this is like, bonus money, and like maybe I can go cover a concert and stuff, but I didn't really think that like my hobby was going to turn into anything. But I really did love journalism. Like my college had actually gotten rid of their journalism department a few years ago, so there wasn't really that much to do, so I like took like 1 or 2 journalism classes, but it was always something in the back of my mind. So when I got the internship at NBC and I happened to be writing, it was kind of like a fellowship on the job at NBC. So I was there for 1.5 years, first as an intern and then as a PA. And at the same time, I was writing about K-pop, and I ended up being like the overnight PA. So I was showing up to work at like 2:30 a.m. until like 1:30 p.m., which was great because that was daytime in Korea. So it was, I was the only person for this outlet that paid, $5 an article awake. And I happened to work on a 3-hour news show, and the news show in between what I had to do I had a lot of time. So I got a lot of experience writing quick news pieces as the news broke in Korea for this place while I was actually learning about like real news gathering and investigative journalism at NBC. So I was there for about a year and a half doing this, and after that, I kind of hopped around. I was working in television production for a little bit while I was writing. I started writing for places like MTV. This actually just came up the other day that I don't know if anybody else remembers Adrienne Stanley. She was like one of the first people to really start writing about K-pop for a lot of outlets, and she introduced a lot of people to MTV Iggy. And so from MTV Iggy, I started pitching other places like NBC that's like had nothing to do with my NBC. So people were just like, oh, you're at the other part of NBC now. I was like, yeah. And then eventually Billboard saw what I was doing, and someone connected us, and I started writing more or less permalance for Billboard. And then that more or less became my career, and I got to quit from the production thing that was terrible. And yeah, I've been doing that since 2016 now, more or less.
Dang.
Wow.
$5 per article.
Yeah.
I just want to say that no one today in our 2020 should be accepting a job that pays you $5 an article. Please don't. If that's the one piece of advice you get from this podcast, please don't do that.
Please don't. Yes. Yeah.
I still know of one that does $5 an hour, and they chalk it up to like you're getting 15 an hour. So it's like essentially like if you write 3 articles an hour, it's like 15. So it's like I don't know. I wonder actually, because all of you guys sort of in your own way have started your own thing. I know Tamar, you had Cult Scene, or you still have Cult Scene. Lai, you just started your own podcast. Sarah, you have your Young Ajima blog and things like that. And I'm sure you spearheaded a lot of stuff at MTV after MTV Iggy.
Oh, MTV Iggy was like an indie blog. Back in the day, MTV had different blogs for different kind of verticals. That was a very old concept for media, right? To like section off content.
Right.
So MTV Iggy was like the cool indie blog and a lot of the K-pop stuff. But yeah, so we kind of brought it back in like 2017 once BTS was kind of becoming too big to, I think, ignore, frankly. So, and a lot of people didn't know how to cover it, and they were scared to cover it for various reasons. And I was like, I know this world. I've been a K-pop fan for a really long time. Let me have it, even though it was not my job. Like, my job was to like write about movies and television shows and celebrities. And they were like, sure, you can have this. So I kind of ended up adopting it, and very happy that I did.
So when you're doing your own thing, like starting your own thing, aside from if you're not paid for it, like how do you guys make sure that you're consistent with it enough to continue to like Sarah, your blog is so consistent. Like you were posting about the Beyond the Live stuff, like you were in K Contact, like you're so consistent with it. A blog, which like I'm thinking about it, I'm like, I don't know of anybody out here. Like, it used to be a thing like, oh, start your own blog, like just start something. And now it's like, everyone like has podcasts or, a YouTube channel or, they go on different, like, I don't know of anybody that's like, still doing blogs. So like, how do you guys try to stay consistent with what maybe the unpaid or like self-motivated content that you guys are putting out, how do you make sure to stay consistent with that?
Well, the stuff that I write about with AWIN, right now I have a contract to interview rookies. So that's my job there. But that's not the only thing that I'm interested in. And I know that there are a lot of people out there who like to, read still somewhere out there. And, they want to learn about other things like, K-idols are great, but what about movies or just like the concert kind of in an abstract form? So that's why I write still on my blog. It's basically just whatever I feel like writing, op-eds that I know are not going to get picked up by anybody. I just kind of throw there just so I can get that out, because I'm sure the other writers on here will know sometimes it feels like the words are like tingling in your fingertips, like you just got to write something about a certain topic. And a lot of times it's not something that anyone else might be interested in paying for, but that doesn't mean you don't want to write it. You still want to write about it. So that's why I keep my blog. And honestly, I'm not as active as I should be on there, because it's like maybe once or twice a month at this point.
Okay.
Just by everybody around me, I guess we're all journalists except for me and them. But and we all write, right? Okay, yeah. So how important is it to like figure out what to write, host, etc.? Because there's so many avenues now. Like, do a lot of people just say start? Like even me as a YouTuber, I just like just start. What is your like advice for that?
I think that it's always important to have a point of view. That's where the most compelling content comes from. I don't always want to just read a recap of a music video that maybe, you know, a lot of other outlets have written about, or something that you can find anywhere. Like the content that really sticks with me is content that has a really strong identity and a really strong point of view, and they're saying something. They're contributing to the conversation in some way. They're using their voice in some way to be really engaging. So I think that's where to start. It's sometimes, you know, yes, there's like so many things, especially in K-pop, there's so many things happening. At every day you could have 5 releases. Like look what just happened on Monday. I feel like there were so many releases, but you really have to ask yourself, what do I add to this conversation and what do I have to say? Because that's what's going to make your content stand out. Yeah, I think just making sure that you're adding to the conversation again, and you have a real strong point of view. Like that's where it should start. Start with the idea. Don't start with, well, I have to write this. And it's something that I'm now forcing myself to learn now that I'm freelancing full time as opposed to working full time. So I'm now being like, I get the opportunity to tell the stories that I want to tell. And I don't want to miss that. So I'm really focusing on like, what are the stories that only me, Crystal Bell, like I can tell, and the stories that I want to tell. And so that's where it starts, for me at least. Like that, it starts very much with like, what is my point of view? What am I adding?
To expand on that, it's, you know, besides having a point of view, it's also how passionate you are concerning a certain artist or music or something. If something resonates with you, that's how you get your gears going. And like for me, if it were to be like a new album release on how, let's see, who just released a new song? Sunmi, right? Sunmi just released a new single. We can just talk about how visually the color purple is the key aspect to her current promotions, right? So it's like it's really going down to not only your point of view and also, but also how passionate you are about this artist and how long or how much of a fan, because you're trying to put a fan's perspective on it too, so people can relate to it, right? So you're putting a mix of professionalism and your fandom in there, and that's what grabs the readers overall. So I hope that makes sense.
No, yeah, it does. I was wondering, you know, talking about y'all's point of view and making sure to make it unique enough. Like, I'm wondering, like, do you have to go search out, like, okay, who else wrote about this, and let me see, make sure that it's like different. Like, is that part of the process as well when you're pitching, or is it more of like you just know that your pitch is unique? I guess like it, you know, I guess you can't cover every single publication to see who's writing about it, but how do you go about making sure that yours is unique and that you're not rewriting whatever, you know, I don't know, Teen Vogue might have said if you're writing for MTV News?
Yeah. I think every writer thinks that they're a genius. I think every writer, every content creator, every creative person thinks that they're a genius, and they think that they're like the first person to ever have this really cool thought. But you absolutely have to look and see what else is online, because chances are you're probably not the first, but that's okay. Like, I wrote about K-pop fans learning Korean after, you know, the release of the BTS language initiative that they did, and I wanted to write about it. And I was like, how do I write about this? Because there was already this really incredible piece that had already been done on another site, and I was, you know, I read that piece and I was like, what can I add here? And I was like, the new information here is BTS, right? BTS really driving this conversation. And so I framed it around that. And I framed it, I said, what can I add to this conversation? But you absolutely have to look at what is already out there, because you don't want to just kind of maybe regurgitate content. This applies to literally everybody, but always do your research.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's so many instances where when I go into an interview or write something up, most likely I reference and read other people's articles, because that's how you get in-depth research, and that's how you learn more about the stories of the artists that you're about to tell us their stories about. So
I think it's so funny because Lai and Crystal tend to do a lot of like features and a lot of like videos and stuff. And for me, because I come from like a newsier side of things, like for me, it doesn't really matter what I think at all. Like I'm like petrified of op-eds. Actually, I just started writing them recently, and they're terrifying. Like I hate putting myself in the story. I don't think like anyone cares what I think. Like I think at the end of the day, it doesn't matter really what I think about something as much as what I think needs to kind of be out there into the world, and like what I can use my like position to tell the world. Like nobody cares if I was struggling like to write this story. Nobody cares. Like for me, for my job is to find the stories that can be told and how can I tell them. And like I don't need to like it. Like sometimes like the stories that I think are never gonna go, that are I'm gonna have no personal interest in, are like the most fascinating. So like I do interviews nowadays that are like Q&As, but like nobody really cares about the question. Everyone just cares about the answers. So like that's kind of more my perspective, is how do I get these stories out there, because you don't need to know about my story. My story is not interesting.
Well, that's really, I mean, I think Tamar is hitting at a really, really interesting point, because it's different types of journalism, right? Like there's no one way to tell a story. And I think it's really important for your listeners to actually understand different approaches to interviewing artists and to telling stories. And so really there's these two avenues, right? You kind of sit down and you're like, am I going to write a profile? Or am I gonna have a conversation and run a Q&A? And they both have their merits. The point of doing a profile, right, is to capture moments and to capture details. And most importantly, to have observations. Like you are inserting yourself in the story somewhat, but it's because you're pulling observations. You're reading between the lines. You're seeing how they move and how they interact with each other, and you're drawing a conclusion. And that's kind of the importance of a profile. It gives you this robust picture of somebody. And yes, it is relying on the writer to kind of fill in those emotional gaps. But, it's a lot of nuance, it's a lot of detail. Q&As are conversations, and they're brilliant conversations. Like you have to be a really good conversationalist to have a compelling Q&A, because you have to have really... you have to just know how to ask follow-up questions. You have to know how to be an engaging interviewer. Like Q&As are not easy. I think there's like this misconception that maybe they are, and a good Q&A, absolutely not. They're just different ways and different avenues. Even a profile. I know writers who do insert themselves in the story. I've definitely done it before. And I also know other writers who don't. Like they can write a profile without ever referencing themselves. Really, they're just there to be a fly on the wall and to capture a moment. I do think it is funny because we're seeing a lot more K-pop profiles, especially the last year. I think because there are more writers and these writers want to tell different stories, we're seeing more profiles being written. And the constant reaction from fans that I see online, and I've gotten this, I have friends who have gotten this, is like, wow, this reads like fan fiction. And I love that, because it just means that we as storytellers are telling good stories, and you're being captivated and you're reading them and you're like engrossed. You're like, oh my gosh, this person moved their hand and laughed and they're very like, this is fan fiction. And it's like, no, this is actually journalism, but you're just, we're breaking it in. And I think it's really funny to see like that really descript kind of profile writing being considered fan fiction, and I always think it's a good compliment.
I've never thought about that being a compliment, but that makes sense. It makes sense in that respect. Sarah, what's your favorite type of piece to write or cover? Through radio.
Yeah, I'm definitely a conversationalist. So I actually do insert myself to a degree in the article, but not like, well, I'm doing this and this is happening. It's more of I love talking to people. So when I have these Q&As with artists, and I'm sure everyone here understands, like there's a list of questions that you are clear to ask, but when you're doing follow-ups, sometimes there's a question that pops up in your mind while you're having this conversation that's not on the list, and it's like, okay, well, let me just the look on like managers and everybody sitting on the other side of the Skype table right now, as they realize this is not an approved question. So just finding a way to ask those questions, kind of slide them in, and then being able to regurgitate, if you will, everything onto paper. That's what I love to do. It's absolutely terrifying. It's nerve-wracking. I have had many a meltdowns trying to put everything together, but at the end of it, I love the end result of just making a conversation, just putting that conversation that you had onto paper, having it flow properly. I don't know why I love it so much, because when you're in the middle of writing it, it's like, I'm never doing this again. Everybody's going to hate this. I hate it,
Damn.
I love reading like a good Q&A. Like when you can tell, like when you're reading something, you can tell that two people or, multiple people are just vibing. Like that's kind of the best Q&A. And I always go back to a piece, I believe from 2017. It was Taylor Glasby. She interviewed RM for Days Digital. RM from BTS, obviously. And I always go back to that Q&A because I just think it was two people, like right time. They just were on the same, they were vibing, they were on the same page, and it's just probably one of the more honest interviews RM's ever done. And I always revisit it because I like to just feel like I'm there with them. And I think that's like when you're reading a good Q&A, you kind of just feel like you're there with them.
I feel like, speaking of Taylor Glasby, I always think of her Monster X article that she did like last year. That was, they were vibing.
They were definitely vibing. But see, like that's another thing of like a really, really great feature, a really great feature, and that captures a moment. And kind of, to me, when you're writing a profile, I think the goal is to make fans feel like they're there, and to like make them feel like, a lot of fans will never get the chance to meet their favorite artists, and it's not just for K-pop, it's for celebrities at large. And I felt like that Monsta X article, it made me feel like I knew what being in Monsta X's presence would be like.
You guys were talking about like, when you're in interviews and things like that. And obviously, I'm not sure completely if it's different between, K-pop and maybe like obviously westernized media. But, obviously when you go into interviews, and most of the time, like you mentioned, Sarah, you're given like questions that you're cleared certain questions, and then certain ones you cannot answer. And in journalism, I'm sure you learned this in journalism school, Crystal, but like I know a lot of journalists sometimes are like, I'm not going to give you questions because that's like, not journalistic integrity, or however you want to call it. But like, is that something that to this day maybe still, and you can answer this, Tamar or Lai, like, is that something that you guys feel sort of like, or are you just used to it? Like, I'm sure you guys are probably both used to like the fact that, okay, I have to give you my questions, but like, how does that work?
Yeah, I don't give questions.
Oh, you don't?
No. If someone tells me they need questions, like I'll be like, here's some talking points, and then I'll be like, do the bare minimum. Like, yeah, I'm going to talk about your album, and I'm going to talk about your song, and I'm going to talk about, maybe your songwriting. And that's pretty much what I do. And if at the interview, like, okay, well, I walked away from an interview at KCON last year because KCON makes you send questions to get passed on. So that's the only time I do questions. And I got there, and I had actually been really surprised that questions were approved, and then I got there and they were like, well, only 4 of your questions are approved. And we spent like 15 minutes fighting about why those questions couldn't be approved, and then I essentially said, nope, we're done. So I walked away from that interview. There's definitely times where I'm like, I don't do email interviews if it's like a long form interview. Like if it's like I just did a KCON piece, and they got like some quotes from GFriend members, which was really nice, but like that I don't consider as an interview. That's just like adding color to a story, like a business focused feature. So, but for an interview, yeah, I don't, I'm trying to think the last time I gave like real questions for an interview. The thing is, like, somebody once told me, and I actually tweeted this out, and people thought it was like an insult, but I actually thought it was like the best compliment ever. Someone told me that like being a PR for an interview with me is really difficult because they have to like be on like their toes, because even if I do get like, because there have been times when people are like, well, if you don't submit any questions, so I submit like 6 questions, and then I go in and I ask whatever I want, because if you want PR, just hire someone to do PR. Like, PR people all the time just put together Q&As with artists and send those out to people. And, like, a lot of the times those become, like, blog posts and stuff. And so if you want that, like, get your PR team to do that. But if you want someone to tell your story beyond, the everyday Q&As. Like, there's no point in wasting a bunch of journalists' times by just regurgitating the same answers over and over and over again.
They're sometimes beholden to the companies, right? Especially if you're writing for a smaller outlet and you might not get the interview if you don't send questions in advance. These artists, their first language is not English, and so they want to prepare them. And I think it's twofold, because when you're interviewing K-pop groups and Korean artists, you're also relying on a translator to convey your message often. That's another kind of hurdle sometimes, is maybe your question's not being translated the way that you ask them. I always say, here are some questions, here are some talking points, but I'm free to ask follow-ups. And I find that more often than not, when you're in the room with an artist and you ask a follow-up or you ask a question that maybe was not approved, they just answer it, you know? And if it's not offensive and no one says something like out of line, everyone's just cool. And, you know, it's almost like management is they're almost too cautious. But then when you're actually in a room with somebody and you're asking them and you're having a good conversation, 9 times out of 10, they don't care. You can ask whatever you want. And so it's just kind of like jumping through hoops to get to that moment where you're in the room with an artist.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had an issue like with a PR person interrupting. Like, people always are like, oh, you know, K-pop interviews have to do questions. And I'm like, the questions are literally just like for them to vet.
I did have one instance with the group, and I feel like it's important to say it was a girl group, and they gave me an answer, and then their manager spoke to them in Korean, and then they gave me another answer. So I did kind of have that issue, which was really interesting, and I was like, okay.
I did just remember one where something was struck from the record, which was a ridiculous thing, which was that the group went out drinking and the members were having fun and talking about that, and the PR didn't want that to be on the record.
Oh, true.
But I would much rather have something be struck from the record than to never having the opportunity to ask it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I would much rather have an interview and have the management say, like, by the way, they said this and we just we don't want that, you know. And I am much more like, you know, I'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll work with you. But if you're trying to just like cross off questions without even me getting the chance to ask them, that's where I get kind of really annoyed. And I've gone back to companies before to really press them and say, what is your problem with this question? And oftentimes it's like they just don't understand, or the tone is different. Like they don't understand that maybe it's something that's not like a super serious question. They're like, why are you asking this? And I'm like, no, this is just to be like fun. And it's like, oh, okay. And then once you explain, it's fine.
The first time I ever covered a group for Billboard was GOT7, and it was when Bam Bam was really obsessed with dabbing. And like they asked for questions, and this was like when I was just starting. And I included like my last question on the list was, when will Bam Bam stop dabbing? And it was just like a joke question, and they were like, well, we don't want that to be the end of the interview. Like, they were like, yeah, you can't ask that question. And after I pushed back, the response was, well, we just don't want like that to be the final note. For them, it was like very structured. And I recently did like an interview when I was in Korea, and I had actually given the translator the questions beforehand. Not the band didn't get them, but like they were pretty intense questions, and she was going by the list. Like, she was going in order. I was like, no, not that question. And I just thought it was so funny. I was like, I just look to these as like conversations. Like, the list was so important to like the translator who's done this for years, and I thought it was like hilarious, and we had a good laugh about it afterwards. She was like, oh yeah, I just was just translating.
And that's why I don't know if it's like this for anyone else, but that's why it takes me so long to prepare for an interview and to write questions. Like, my last interview, I spent 3 to 4 hours writing 18 questions for a group that I know literally everything about, and yet I spent 4 hours writing questions because in my mind I had the conversation because I was like, if I'm having this conversation, this is how it's gonna go. And there's some real technical gymnastics sometimes that you have to do in your mind to prepare for these interviews. Sometimes for a group that I know less about, the questions come even easier because it's like, I want to get to know them. And if it's a group that I literally know everything about, then I sit there like, wait, I know everything, so what can I ask them?
You guys were talking a little bit about research. So let's say there is a group that you don't know anything about. Maybe they just debuted, and you know, some of the members were on Produced 101, like, or whatever show it happens to be, or you know, that you just never really paid attention to them, and now you have to interview them. How much time do you spend researching these groups? Like, do you feel like you need to go back and obviously listen to their discography, read the lyrics, then like look up variety show appearances, as well as to understand their personalities and then look up like their own content? Like, how much time do you normally spend when it comes to researching?
Well, it kind of depends on what or who the group is. Like I said, I've been doing a lot of rookie groups recently, but I also did an interview with Davi, who he's an artist, but he also has written like a lot of songs for Hayes and like Super Junior. So with him, I don't know, maybe because I was kind of like struck by the fandom. I was like, oh, I actually, in the beginning, I had no idea who he was. But as I was researching him, I was like, I really do enjoy the music that I'm hearing. So I know the artist, like his discography. But now to go into like all the songs that he's written and like how he got started, I was searching the internet, like I was on Reddit, like just trying to find anything that I could so I could come up with questions that are not asked, like, the kind of the stock questions, like what's your favorite thing to do when you're not producing music or whatever, so sometimes it can take like a day, a few hours. Other times for me it takes a lot longer, just because I do come from a smaller publication. I just want to make sure I do everything well.
Lai, how do you feel about research?
I give myself like a week before the interview's happening, and I would start with the music, look through the translated lyrics, who produced what. Then I kind of just dive into the whole discography at once. And then after that, my process would be like, all right, if I'm not listening to the music, I'll admit, I'll watch crack videos and unhelpful guides.
Yep.
Hey, shout out to
You
them.
get personality from that, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's how I actually come up with a good majority of my questions. I just dive into their personalities more. And eventually I go into interviews and I create these questions with the intent like, all right, this is going to be the next group I stand. And that's how that process works for me. And 9 out of 10 times it has worked out pretty well. And it makes you get a vibe on who they are once you meet them too, and try to get a feel of their vibe and auras.
Was it any different preparing for your interview with ITZY in day 6, and it was on camera? Like, was there any other different preparation that you had to do normally, or that was different from your normal interviews that you would do for Tomorrow Mag or Pop Crush?
Dude, I was fucking shitting myself. And but, I mean, it's for me. I prefer conversational interviews to bring way more personable, right? I don't really like writing. I just tend to talk more, and that's how I like to do my interviews. So preparing for that, I was just shitting myself because it was going to be live and it was going to be on camera, and you have all these fandoms like watching you and the like Hawkeyes, and you don't want to mess up. But at the same time, it's like when you do all that research and you kind of already know, you get the feel of them and you already know their music, you know how their personalities are on variety shows, these crack videos and all these guides. When we're referring back to all the build interviews like day 6 and ITZY, you have Leah and you have Jay and you have Young K, who are English speakers, and they vibe with you because they know the culture. So that's why it was easier for me to conduct that interview and weave the conversation. But if you were to ask me if I prefer doing live interviews than written interviews, I would definitely prefer live interviews. Just because everyone loves to see their faves animated on camera, and just it's in real time. So
Nice. All right, Dre, do you want to ask the next question?
All right. Pretty standard question, I feel, because I'm very curious about it. Who are the journalists that have and still inspire you today, and why?
For me, there are a lot of culture journalists and culture writers, maybe not specific to K-pop. A few of them, though, may have dabbled in K-pop. One being Alex Jung, who wrote the BTS cover story for Billboard back in 2018. But he also wrote like a really brilliant Bong Joon-ho profile for Vulture last year. I think, again, he's just a writer that is great at profiling celebrities and artists, but also a really great conversationalist and can turn around a really cool, great, in-depth Q&A. There's a writer at Rolling Stone, Charles Holmes. Full disclosure, I used to work with him at MTV News, but I think he is the funniest person I've ever met. And he wrote the Megan Thee Stallion cover story for Rolling Stone recently. Check it out. It's amazing. The lead is perfect. And Allison P. Davis at The Cut, another writer that I just really enjoy. She did a great profile with Lizzo last year. So yeah, it's a lot of culture writers, and I think, everyone here, obviously. Also, like, who we mentioned, like Taylor, who I was reading kind of before I was even getting into writing about K-pop a lot, and frequently. I was reading her work. Those are a few of the writers that really inspire me, just because I think they brilliantly capture. Oh, and Rachel Handler at Vulture. Lots of Vulture. I'm a New York gal, so I like those New York writers. But she's so funny. Read all of her Fiona Apple coverage. It's amazing. She's like the only person that Fiona Apple trusts in the world, so she gets like exclusive access. I'm inspired by people whose work becomes canon, and so I think about this a lot in terms of K-pop. Oftentimes, like, when we write something, it becomes canon for fans. Like, it becomes part of the mythos and the lore, and it's something that you'll reference time and time again. Like, actually, to prepare for this, I reread one of my favorite profiles of all time, which is this amazing profile of Jenny Slate from 2017 by Jada Yon. And it's so good, and I think about it so often, and I will quote things. Like, I'll just quote things like, I know that Chris Evans, he's like primary colors. And I love that line. And I think about it so often. And then I think about how fans of K-pop read our work and they think about things that we've written. And like, that makes me really happy to know that things that we have all written, fans are taking and talking about, and it's becoming canon. It's becoming part of the lore, and it's becoming part of their story, the artist's story.
Love it. That was a great answer. All right, Tamar.
So I mean, I was thinking about this, and I just wanted to name one person because it's really hard for me to name everybody. But someone whose work that but every time I see it, anytime, anywhere I see it showing up, I'm just like, shit, I wish I wrote that. Is Alana Kaplan. She's a freelancer and does a lot of really, really great profiles and does like a lot of like oral histories about pop culture. Like, I just saw on Facebook that she's looking to talk to people who started rollerblading since COVID. Like, she has done all these like really great, like anything that's like a trend that you as a human being, or like I guess as a human being, as I'm interested in, she's like in my brain. So like she did something with Josie and the Pussycats' I think 25th anniversary. I don't know what it was. Anyway, she did like a great oral history about the Josie and the Pussycats movie, which is like one of my all-time favorites. And she does like all these really great features that just like are so obvious and so great. And she draws such great insight from all these artists. And she has like such like a magic touch. And I just really, really like, if I could be reborn as a writer, I'd want to be Alana Kaplan.
Nice. Okay, Sarah.
Gosh, how can I go after that? Of course, like everyone in this room, I really do look up to, because even now, like after, as long as I've been writing, I still don't feel like the journalist title fits on my shoulders well, because I'm just having fun. So I don't know, but I would say she's not even like I don't want to say traditional journalist, but like Robin Roberts, the way she conducts interviews. I love it because it just seems like I'm sitting down at a coffee shop with a friend that I haven't seen in a long time, and we're just catching up. And that's how I like to do interviews. That's how I like to write, even if it's just like a regular article. I like writing like I'm just talking with someone. So I kind of look to her when I get stumped on things.
I love that.
Can I just say, Sarah, you're like such a real person and such a real journalist. I don't want you to think that. Everyone like should read your work. I love your work.
Oh my gosh. Thank you.
Yes. All right, lastly, Lai.
Not exactly a writer, but someone who definitely inspires me is Sway Calloway and Suchin Park. Growing up, I always watched MTV News with them. It really is like MTV News is pretty much what triggered me to become who I wanted to be today, especially the way of pop culture. I didn't really watch cartoons as much. I was more of Beavis and Butthead, just went straight to MTV as a kid. So whenever TRL was on and there was Carson Daly, like those were the people that made me want to jump into broadcasting and wanted me to grab a mic and talk and tell stories.
Nice.
In my feels. Because we're getting in our feels.
Yes.
Besides writer's block, what other unique challenges have you faced as a K-pop journalist, actually?
Let me just say, because this happened recently. It was a Skype, everything now is Skype interviews or Zoom. And this group decided to have their interview in a coffee shop during working hours.
My mouth dropped.
Oh, that's the worst.
And there was construction going on outside the coffee shop. And as I said, I'm a teacher in my daytime life. We have something called teacher face, where it's a smile, but it's one of those smiles where you're not really smiling.
Yeah.
But it's there. And so I'm smiling, but in my head, like, is this real life? Like, for the first time ever, I'm like, where are the managers? Like, where is everybody to kind of get this under control? Because it was really bad. Obviously, we had to reschedule. So things like that. And of course, you're working on their time. So it was really freaking late. And I was like, I'm staying up for this shit? Like, come on.
Right.
Rescheduling is definitely like the number one thing, especially when it happens like 1 hour. It was supposed to happen an hour before, and they're like, yeah, the artist is tired. Can we reschedule till tomorrow? And we're just like, oh, okay. So I have to do the adjustments. I mean, it's give and take, but usually, majority for me, it's all writer's block, really. When, like I said, when artist does not give you meat and you have to cure the meat yourself and literally take it from the cow and butcher the cow yourself to get the meat. Yeah, that's the struggle. And then there's writer's block. And then there's rescheduling. Those are the three struggles that I go through.
Yeah, I think for me, as a producer, like producing shoots and stuff, last minute changes or just, getting to set and changing things and being like, oh, this artist isn't going to do that, even though they pre-approved it. That's always super frustrating because then it's not only time on the line, but it's real money on the line. Yeah, like if we've rented a bus and we got this bus for 2 hours and it was thousands of dollars, we got to be on schedule. And so having things change last minute is super frustrating. Now, do I think that it could happen literally with any celebrity? Absolutely. I've interviewed a lot of people, not just K-pop idols. They're all late, always. But when it's a group of people, like K-pop entourages are no joke, like it's 30 people, sometimes more than 30 people, then it gets a little stressful because you're like, I not only have to worry about these individuals who are in the group, but I have to worry about the 20 other people that they brought with them and make sure that these people are in the building, these people are on the bus, or everyone's where they need to be. And I want to be, as a producer, you're also kind of like a host. You're spinning a million plates and you want to make sure everybody's happy. And I think the other frustrating part sometimes is I'm so grateful to translators. Obviously, I would not be able to do this job without translators, so I am very grateful to them. And I am learning Korean, but I don't know nearly enough. I can't have a full conversation, so I'm very grateful to translators. But sometimes it's hard because I think the best interviews that I've done are when I have like a pre-existing relationship with a translator, which happens in this field because you do work with people a lot. And when I have that pre-existing relationship, there's like a lot of trust and like they know my style, I know their style. And then it's like we're a team. I'm like a team with the translator. Sometimes when it's like you're just meeting the translator or you're on the phone and there's just like a translator and you don't even know, there's just like a voice, it's always really hard because you're basically relying on them to ask your questions and to convey your message. So I have to have a lot of trust in that person. And so, again, it's not that I've had bad experiences with translators. There's only been one instance where I feel like I had to get things retranslated because I didn't think that things were translated the way that things were actually said, and I was correct. So I had to get it retranslated. But it's always a unique challenge, I will say that.
I'm thinking about this, and I wonder, if you're pitching to a new publication and you need to do this article, and they've never done K-pop or they rarely do it, and you need a translator. Is it up to you to figure out who that translator will be, or is it up to the editor of the publication? And on top of that, with that in mind, would you recommend freelancing or, committing yourself to an organization?
Definitely not obvious that the company will pay for it. That is not obvious at all. There is not obvious that many freelance companies will pay for translation or transcription. I was not getting transcription paid for Billboard for years, and then like a year ago one of my editors was like, why aren't you invoicing us for that? And I was like, oh, because that was never made clear to me that was a thing I could do. So yeah, there have been times when I've had to find rooms, or there have been times when I've had to say to PR, like, if you don't get a room, I can't afford to get a room, so we're just not going to do the interview. So like, we've either pooled together and gotten an Airbnb or something as a freelancer. Some outlets, like for Billboard, I literally could just say, hey, can someone book me a meeting space and I'll meet you there, and someone will just have to let me in. But that's like, I think it's important to attach yourself to an organization that wants K-pop but is also willing to spend the money on it, especially as a freelancer. Like, I don't particularly love freelancing. I think I fell into it and I made it work, and I like can do the hustle, but I don't think it's necessarily a good thing, because you can't really grow what you're doing without being limited by other people, which happens at any org. But as a freelancer, like, there's no rhyme or reason sometimes given for things. There have been plenty of times where it's like, yeah, that should happen, but then, you hear budget cuts or something. And like, my first BTS interview was an absolute disaster. I got there and they told me, oh yeah, we had to reschedule some other interviews, so you only have 7 minutes. There was some other stuff that happened, and then I ended up talking to them more in the hallway, like while they were eating burgers, but like that didn't turn into part of my interview. And then this was the first time I was writing for a new outlet, because Billboard has other people who cover K-pop, so I think Jeff Benjamin was writing that BTS interview. So I was like, I'm gonna find a new place to work with, and I work with an outlet, and not only did the editor like rewrite my entire piece, but apparently another editor published it with a headline that even my editor hated. So like, the entire piece was just absolutely terrible. But it was also at the time the most I had ever made for a piece. And I was just sitting there staring at this like, I should be really happy right now. But this was all around like traumatizing. So there's just like a lot of moving parts at that time. Most K-pop teams do provide translators. I think like maybe once every 6 months I have to pay for a translator. Like, I don't think it's super common. The last time I had to get a translator was for Wavy, which was weird for a lot of reasons. And I got a really phenomenal translator, but she walked out and she was just like, I should have watched some of their videos, because they were so chaotic that like she just couldn't keep up with their chaos. And I thought it was the funniest thing in the world. She was just like, you guys were speaking in English and then Korean and then Chinese, and I was just losing my mind. And it was funny. So sometimes that happens. Getting lost in translation is definitely something that happens. There's only been one time where I've actually stopped an interview, because the translator was literally just like, I'm giving you a 2-sentence question, you're asking 5 words. And sometimes I think the best interviews are the ones, for me, just because I do have that understanding, are with groups like GOT7, who like the Korean speaking members understand a lot of English, and then they have a lot of English members, so like I can just ask the question in English and they can respond in Korean and we can move forward. So most of my interviews now are kind of like that.
I had a group once that was intentionally making their answers more complicated for the translator. They were using these really old kind of expressions, because they were trolling her. Yeah, they were comfortable enough with her because she had been touring with them. So they were comfortable enough with her. They were just like trolling her, and they were like, sorry, Nuna. And I was just sitting there being like, this is great color. Like, this to me tells me more about the group sometimes than their actual answers. Like, that whole interaction, I was like, this is great. I can use this.
Speaking of that, what interpersonal skills do you feel like you need for interviews, when it comes to sitting down or through Zoom or Skype like you were doing, Sarah? What interpersonal skills do you feel like you need to know? If you're, you might be a fan and, you might need to rein it in like real quick kind of thing. What kind of suggestions and like skills do you think you need to have?
So my first interview that I ever did, actually I met Lai at the first interview I ever done.
Was it Dynamic Duo?
Yeah, it was Dynamic Duo. Yeah, and I was like uber fan for like the first two questions, and then I kind of like heard myself talking to them. And you know when you meet someone that you really admire, you start like smiling really big, and you're like, so, and it was like, whoa, like dial it back like 6 notches, you know. So remember that they're human, and that it's okay if you kind of flub your lines, if you have a brain fart, like shit happens, you know. So
True.
and they understand that, and a lot of times I feel like they kind of appreciate that if they see like, okay, she's really human just like I am, and I'm not trying to treat you like up here, like we're all on the same level, even though, you know, you probably make way more in one day than I do ever. But when I get really nervous, I just think, okay, these guys are like my kids, or the girls, or they're like my kids' age, so just they're normal, you know, just be normal.
I love that.
Reading body language too is important, I think, especially capturing, like, again, just capturing those small moments, like how someone says something or the reactions of other members when that person says something. I know a lot of other journalists like to record their interviews. Obviously the video never sees the light of day, but they do it just so that they could rewatch it and kind of read everyone's interactions and body language. You know, I don't personally do it because I think sometimes even something as simple as an iPhone can make an artist almost nervous. I do think that there is you get a different person that on camera versus off camera. You know, do I think pieces that have those details in them are richer? Yes. So it's a personal decision as a writer that you have to make, and we all have our different, I think we all kind of operate differently, and we all do things a little bit differently. But I think, yeah, the ability to really just like, don't just focus on what they're saying. I know it's like it's like super compelling and you want to just like focus on everything they're saying. Like look at sometimes what's not being said, or look at the way that they say things, or, you know, the way that they move their hands, or like, are they an animated talker? Do they talk like this? Like, I'm Italian, I talk like this, you know, like how do they talk? And I think that is, you know, do they get shy when asked certain questions? Like little details like that can make pieces go from being, you know, a really good interview to like an amazing interview or an amazing profile. So just like always being alert and being aware of like what's happening around you.
It's not like on the same like wavelength as either of those things, but I got really overwhelmed during an interview with a band I really liked, and it was a video interview, and I was like panned for it because my like fallback is to like just be really super serious about everything. Like I'm not a very fun person or animated person, and it really came through this interview, and people were like trolling me for weeks about it, and like I ended up on like blockchains because people thought I just hated the band, and I was like, no, they're one of my favorite groups, but that's okay. And I started taking improv classes, and I'm absolutely not a funny human being, but improv is really great for like making your brain work, and I was really excited because in my class there were people there who clearly also didn't want to be there just like me, but we were all like, we're gonna do this for our like personal like needs and our life, and like there were people who you know are gonna be like on SNL in like 10 years, but there was like a bunch of us who were there who were like, yeah, we're doing this for professional development. But I did definitely learn a lot about how to think about conversations and how to think about the way you position like your thoughts and your expressions if you want to become a better interviewer like on camera. I think it was something really helpful because you have to be so quick for improv.
It's honestly so unfair though hearing you talk about that, because as women in this space, it's like you can't be too animated because then they're like, oh, she's a fangirl, and you can't be, you know, too dull or like too serious because they're like, oh, she's not interested and she hates them.
I like know if like I take a picture with a group, if it's with women, I'll be a lot closer to them. With men, I won't be touching them at all. Like I have really awkward pictures with boy bands because like I've been scarred. Like my thing is like nobody cares about my fangirling. Like nobody needs to know that I'm a fangirl, so I'm just gonna go totally like super serious journalist because I don't want to be hated because I'm smiling the wrong way, because that's happened before. Like you don't get to ruin my happiness. So like if you think I was being super serious and that's not funny, like okay, fine, go watch a variety show. Like I'm not asking the questions for entertainment. I'm asking questions because like I think there's a story to be told. my social media presence isn't that I'm like a K-pop writer. Mine is that I'm a person, and like I'm a person who likes K-pop, and I like a lot of other things. And if you want to follow me, go for it, but don't follow me just because you think a K-pop writer should be acting a certain way or shouldn't be acting a certain way or should have certain feelings about certain things. Like I'm not playing any games. Like this is my career. This is something I love. Like, I'm not just doing this because I, have an agenda. And people are always saying things like that about, like, people who write about K-pop. Like, oh, they're doing it just for the access. They're doing it just to boost their ego. And I'm sure there are people who are doing that. But, like, I'm doing it because this is something I think I'm particularly good at. I don't know, like, idols are humans and journalists are humans. And, like, at the end of the day, we all just want to, do our job and tell a good story. And I don't know. Sorry, this is my TED Talk.
No, it's fine.
It's a big part of, I think, this job, and it's not something that anyone can prepare you for. So I don't even think us four talking about it could prepare you for the complete mental, like, exhaustion that comes sometimes from being like a person on the internet. You guys should do a whole separate episode about that because there's a lot to say.
I feel like there's so many more questions I really want to ask you guys. Like, I don't want this to end.
You guys can continue. I have to get on a call.
Oh man. Well, thank you, Tamar.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm really sorry. I have back-to-back calls.
It's all good.
No worries. A lot of people I know have been talking about, how, with K-pop fans and their involvement in silencing or like making sure that all lives matter is not a thing. This unity of K-pop fandom has started to come together, but obviously that's not always the case. But a lot of people have, are just now seeing it and are thinking like, everyone's just a diverse, fun, go-lucky group together, and that's not the case. How do you feel about, how media have been portraying that, and what do you think, if there needs to be change, what do you think should be changed?
Oh my gosh. Okay.
I know. Such a loaded question. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, I have been very vocal lately, probably not this week, but in the previous weeks, I've been very vocal on social media simply because it was like the media bomb dropped. And then all of a sudden, all these articles were coming out saying how wonderful, like you said, being a K-pop fan is, and it's all roses and candy and sprinkles and whatever. And it's like, yeah, we did, and by we I mean K-pop fans, did a few good things. There are some that I had personal issues with, for example, trending the White Lives Matter hashtag instead of trending something else, so we don't even have to see something like that. Like, yeah, I get it, you guys filled up this hashtag with fan cams and everything, and I can't tell you how many like requests I got to talk about that and what exactly is a fan cam. And it's like, come on, if I can do research, so can you. But yes, that's great. However, we should not be trending this at all. Being a fan of color, we have our issues where there is racism and xenophobia. And I wish, like now, there are articles that are being written that are getting it right. But in the beginning, that was not so much the case because like they're not used to K-pop fandom, and so they kind of just did a quick glance over, if you will, like, oh, okay, yeah, this seems like this always happens and fandoms always come together. No, fandoms have their own agendas, just like everything else, so I wish, and I do see that the change is happening, but I wish that it was happening a little bit faster, perhaps, that conversations are being had and people are kind of looking inwardly at their own fandoms as well as themselves about things, because everything is not roses here. It's still great. I still love being a fan, but I also know shit ain't all great.
True.
Those are all my questions. Thank you for answering that, Sarah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Can I actually circle back on something that I think could be really important for listeners? What the state of freelance is right now, I think is really important, and talking a bit about how to get your pitches seen, I think could be really, really great for listeners. So for the last 5.5 years, I had a full-time job at MTV, and I didn't think much about freelancing. In fact, I never freelanced anything for 5.5 years. And I was really fortunate a lot to be put in a position to commission pieces and to work with writers, to work with, Tamar and other writers that we're all very familiar with. But now that I'm on the other side of it, it's been quite a steep learning curve, especially right now in the middle of coronavirus and the spread of COVID-19. It has impacted so many newsrooms across our industry, and it's impacted so many budgets specifically. It's made getting these pieces about K-pop idols and about K-pop in general really hard to get approved because, you know, no one's got the money to approve a K-pop story right now. So I think just some of the things that I've learned, and I want everybody to speak to this because you guys have been doing it a lot longer than I have, and I need to learn from you. I think it's really important. Really important like how you write your pitch. And as an editor, I know kind of like the pitches that I like to receive and the pitches that always grab my eye versus the pitches that I kind of like maybe looked at, glanced at, and was like pass. And I think it's super important to, again, have an idea and you'll be really surprised by how many writers who are just like, I want to talk to this person, or are you looking for someone to talk to this artist or this group? And they don't really offer much of a framing point or a point of view or an idea. It's just like, can I talk to them? And so first of all, don't do that. Again, always like if there's a release you're excited about that you want to review, or if there's a story that you see emerging on Stan Twitter that no one's covering and you find to be like this really cool story, or if you see a group that is rising and no one's really talking about them, have that idea, like frame it, treat it like, I would always say like treat it like the first maybe 300 words of your piece. Like that lead is kind of what you want to go into your pitch and really frame it as like, this is the story. Don't make your pitches too long. So don't give them like a 700 word opus, like keep it to like 300, 350 words. Like editors are really busy, especially right now. There's a lot of coverage, a lot of important priority coverage that they have to do. Put your, like, really important to have that point of view in your subject line. And if you've written for other outlets, be like Teen Vogue writer pitch or Pop Crush writer pitch, or, you know, add a little color to it, like young, like Gen Z, writer pitch, like show them who you are in your subject line, and then add like, so, you know, Gen Z writer pitch and like why 80s is gonna rule the world, you know, like things like that. Like make your subject lines really descriptive and really grabby. And I also think for freelance, do your research, like we've been saying, but also like research the editors. So important. Like I've spent so much time on Twitter, like I don't want to, like, stalking editors and like seeing like what are they like, have they tweeted about what they're looking for? Like literally I like put in a lot of work, like do that legwork. It's really important. And familiarize yourself with the site. Don't blindly pitch a site because you like the site. Actually read the site and say like, oh, you know what? They've actually already talked to ATs, so maybe I shouldn't pitch them. Or maybe they did talk to ATs, but they didn't talk about this, and so I'm going to frame it this way. So again, like do your research, familiarize yourself with the site and the editor. And yeah, those are like the three really important things I've learned. But Sara and Lai, you guys have been doing it for longer, so please jump in.
You did the groundwork. Familiarizing with the publication is definitely the most important thing, because you want to make sure that you are conveying the same voice as they are. And also when it comes to editors, girl, Crystal, I did my own stalking too. So, I mean, researching the editors, looking after who the fellow writers that, other writers under that publication, who they follow, who could lead you to a potential lead. Those are the people that you want to look for and pitch to, or even get some, professional advice from. Those are your targets. And then when it comes to actually writing the pitch to these editors and writers, I usually just introduce myself with it as my lead. That would be like my first sentence. And then just, in probably less than 250 words, I would just lay down my pitch, and then present them with examples of my past work. And that usually gets through almost a good amount of the time. But yeah, the most important thing is you gotta make sure that the publication that you are pitching for is something that you really want to be a part of, not just because of the name, but because their messages and their content is relatable to you. Sometimes it's not about the name, but more so making sure that your personality is being put into the work for these publications as well.
I have absolutely nothing to add.
Everyone
They
took
nailed it on the head.
Yeah, and don't be discouraged when you don't hear back. I know that's like the toughest part. My first week of doing like this freelance life, I was so anxious and so afraid that I was going to become irrelevant that I literally sent so many I sent so many pitches, maybe 15 pitches. I probably heard back from only 4 or maybe 5. That's generous of those editors. The other 10, you gotta let go, and it's not personal. Editors are busy. We're all human, as we've established. I would say if you're not on a time crunch, like if it's not a super timely piece that you're pitching, wait a week between sending your first email and following up. Like definitely make sure to follow up. Like don't just give up on it if they don't respond. Sometimes just like getting it to the top of their inbox is really helpful again. But just definitely don't like email somebody every day. Building a brand, I think, is actually really important. So even if you can't get published, there are other ways to publish your art, to publish your work. There's Medium. Medium's great. I know a lot of writers who publish to Medium, like lengthy, beautiful pieces on Medium, just that are free.
Right.
Substack. One of my favorite writers right now, actually, she has a Substack, and she writes about fandom and standom, and I think she's brilliant, Denisha Coulier, and she has this Substack. It's astan.substack.com, and it's just a newsletter. You can sign up for her newsletter. Again, there are just so many ways to get your work out there and to get noticed that aren't reliant on editors commissioning pieces. However, you have to do what makes sense for you. I don't think that if you can't afford to do it, if you really I think, especially right now, we all have to be asking ourselves these questions, right? Like, how much am I willing to extend myself to do this? How much am I, I want to write something. Can I write it for free? Do I have the privilege of writing it for free? I'm very lucky that I have the privilege of writing articles, at least for right now, until who knows. But, if I wanted to write something on Medium, I could do that. It's a personal thing, but if you want to expand your voice and to to just write and to be published, there are free outlets available to you to do that.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that breakdown. That was definitely necessary.
Yeah, for real.
To talk about, the ins and outs of freelance. And I guess this is kind of following up, but also kind of ending it with, where can people find you for if you're freelancing, you're writing however many articles a week. I've seen different types, you can either host your articles on, any portfolio or on Contently or Muckracks. Where can people find most of y'all's work? And where can also people follow you across social media platforms?
I've seen my work on Muckrack, so I think people could just go to Muckrack. And then I do have an e-portfolio that I haven't updated, but it's on WordPress. But I will be opening a Contently soon. My podcast is officially ended its first season. It's a slice of life. I talk about anything and everything that comes to my mind. Literally anything and everything. You can listen to it on Anchor and Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And you could follow me on Twitter and Instagram. That's Lai Frances, LAIFRNCS.
I am on Muckrack right now. Social media, Young Ajumma across the board. YOUNGAJUMMAH. And I do want to plug my podcast. I have a podcast that's on A1 Radio exclusively. I'm trying to expand on it because I talk about Korean hip hop and R&B about 98% of the time, and I see that it is gaining traction now. A lot of people are interested, especially in the R&B side of Korean music. So yeah, anywhere you can just get the online radio stations is where you can find AWIN. AWIN is AEWEN, and you know that you found the correct one. If you see the cute looking cat or tiger, we go back and forth deciding on what it is. So, blog also youngajumma.com, where I just run my mouth on any and everything.
I'm currently a work in progress. I am on Muckrack, so you can catch up on all my older articles there. I'm currently freelancing for a lot of different outlets, including Teen Vogue. Very excited. I have a big profile with a group coming out tomorrow. So by the time that this airs, it will have already been birthed into the world. So very excited about that. I'm trying to build a website, but all the other Crystal Bells have stolen the good URLs. So I'm kind of having an existential crisis about that. So maybe I'll look into Contently. I've been toying with the idea of starting a newsletter on Substack, so maybe I'll do that. I mean, the opportunities are just endless. But for now, you can follow all of my thoughts about K-pop and other internet things on Twitter at Crystal Bell, CrystalBell. But yeah, so that's where you can hit me up directly. Like, my DMs are open. I'm always down to receive any kind of meme or story lead, anything you want to talk about. I probably want to talk about it too.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you for doing this. It's really important, and there are a lot of new emerging writers who I think are always tweeting us and wanting to know how to get involved and know how to do what we do, and having a platform like this I think is the most beneficial thing and helpful thing for them. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you guys for listening to Journalist Roundtable 1 for creating K-pop / making K-pop with In My Feels. I'm Emily.
I'm Lai.
And I'm Crystal.
And I'm Sara, aka Young Ajima.
And we will see you guys next time.